It's really wonderful to see everyone online here this morning. This is our second Festivals and Events Learning Series webinar for winter 2025. And I just want to say a special thanks to Debbie and the team at Festivals and Events Ontario. We were just saying earlier, we've been doing this together now for a few years, and it works really well, and we're really happy to have that partnership continuing. So it's great to be alongside them again this morning. And special thanks to our guests, Victoria and Asif, who you're going to meet shortly. Um, just a quick reminder that a quick little survey will pop up at the end of the session, and we appreciate you taking a few minutes to give us a little bit of feedback. And if any ideas come to mind for future topics you'd like to see covered in these sessions, that's a great place to let us know about that. So with that said, I'm going to pass it over to Debbie, who's our host for this morning.
Thanks, Nora. And I really do love doing these with you. My name's Debbie Mann. I am with Festivals and Events Ontario, and we represent the festival and event industry in the province of Ontario. And through that, I met Victoria Mahoney from Harmony Marketing, who who's on our board of directors as well as uh, runs a few festivals in Toronto or in Ontario. And then she introduced me to Asif, recommending him to speak at our conference, which just happened last week. And and I said earlier to Nora that Asif had jumped in and immersed himself into our culture. And so now, but I didn't get to see him at speak. So now I do. So I'm going to hand it over to Asif Khan and Victoria Mahoney. And just to let you know, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand up under reactions. You can type it in the chat and I'll read it to Asif and Victoria. Or you can wait to the end of the presentation. And again, a quick reminder to please help us out and do the survey at the end of the presentation. All right, over to you, Asif and Victoria.
Okay. Victoria, do you want to start since I'll probably do the bulk of the talk?
Yeah. I'll just introduce myself and then I'll pass it over. So hello, as Debbie said, I'm Victoria Mahoney. I am the head of marketing and partnerships at a company called Harmony Marketing. We're a boutique agency in Toronto, and we specialize in festivals and events. So we co-produce two events on Toronto's waterfront, one of them being the Toronto Waterfront Festival. Behind me, this Big Rubber Duck is kind of our claim to fame. We brought her in 2017, but the event has been around for 15 years now. And we bring on land and on water programming with the goal of promoting Toronto's waterfront as an international destination. And then we do a winter event called Sugar Shack, which is a maple syrup festival, and we kind of bring Canadian entertainment, and we have a lumberjack show, and it's the first weekend before March break. And then we have a few other clients that we do sponsorship and event marketing and consulting for. Yeah, we're here to chat about kind of mobile data and do a case study, but I'm going to hand it over to Asif to talk about all of the how it works, and then I will come back at the end to explain how we used his awesome program for our festival last year.
All right. Thanks, Victoria. Hi, everyone. Asif Khan. I'm the founder and president of a company called Ground Level Insights. We are a Toronto-based tech and data analytics company. We've been around now since 2019, and essentially we are focused on using mobile geolocation data from mobile phones to help people understand, what's going on with their festivals, who's coming, and many other questions related to that. So let me share my screen, and we'll start with the presentation. Hang on a second here. Can everybody see that? Okay. Yes. Okay. All right. So as I said, the company's called Ground Level Insights. We have the largest anonymous mobile phone location data set that exists in the world today. So what that means is in Canada, we track roughly about 18 million phones on a daily basis, 24/7, everywhere they go. And We do this in the US, about 220 million phones. We operate in Europe and Asia as well. So we have a lot of data at the end of the day. And what we try to do is use that data to, turn it into value, turn it into insights and analytics to help people really understand what's going on with their properties, their events, their festivals, their businesses. And we work across a number of different industries. When it comes to festivals and events, we work with, small little local events with municipalities, that want to do tracking for a Canada Day or a Rib Fest or a Rotary Club event, all the way up to, we work with the Olympics and the Junos and, big festivals and events like that as well. So there's quite a range in the mix of kind of what we do. We also work in sports. So we work with Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, with the NFL, the NBA. We work with fixed properties in the arts and cultural sector. So many museums and art galleries where we're doing tracking year round, not specific to a weekend or a festival type of an event. And we work with a lot of retail clients as well. So Starbucks and Safeway and folks like that. So it's quite a mixture to what we do. Before I get into kind of what this can do for all of you, let me explain a little bit because I know there's always questions. Have most folks used some sort of mobile data or understand what geofencing is? Can I just maybe see a quick show of hands on the screen? Yeah? Okay. Let me give you a little bit of just technology background to give context to how we do what we do, and then we'll kind of jump into it from there. So this is kind of a simple diagram that outlines what makes up our data platform and how we get all this data. So it starts with app-based data. So we have access to over 12,000 mobile apps that many people already have on their phones. So these are apps like Starbucks, Uber, CNN, the weather app, so on and so on. And so through partnerships we have with these app companies or brokers that represent them, we're pulling background location data. So this, again, everything's anonymized data that we're receiving. So it simply comes down to what's called a device ID on the phone. So every phone, every smartphone, I should say, older phones don't have this, but every smartphone has what's called a device ID. And it's unique to that phone. So we don't have any names or phone numbers or email addresses or anything personally identifiable, but we have this ID number, which is, I'll show you in a second what it looks like. And we're able to pull that information from the background of these apps that are sitting on those phones. We also have partnerships with social media companies. So we pull data from X and Instagram and others. And then we have a way to also match mobile phone data to IP data or web-based data. So, if somebody's searching on your website and looking at, an event page or, what the lineup is for your music festival or whatever, we can actually see, where, from a geo perspective, they're viewing that website from, their IP address. And then we can tie that back to the device ID on the mobile phone. We have Google Maps data. And then the other big piece for us is we have partnerships with Bell, Rogers, Telus, AT&T, Verizon, and other mobile carriers around the world. So we have cell tower data as well. And we blend this all together to create this, this mix of 18 million plus devices that we're seeing in Canada on a daily basis. And the last bucket you see there at the bottom of your screen is more of a sort of why there's a dotted line is it's not part of the mobile platform per se, but it's something that we do offer to some clients where there's situations, in particular with museum and art gallery type clients, where they want us to do tracking of people inside their buildings. And so we can use various Wi-Fi sensors or Bluetooth sensors or other things in the building to actually know they came in this door, they went down this hallway, they stopped and looked at this exhibit, for 3 minutes, and then they went this way. So if you want to actually understand path analytics, we can do those kinds of things as well. Any quick questions on technology or anything like that? Just raise your hand and jump in before I go any further. No, I'll let Debbie manage all those. So, all right. So let's talk just for a second about privacy, because I know everybody is always concerned about this. And so I want to put those concerns at bay because 100% of everything we do, from the moment all the data that we receive, whether it's data coming from Bell or Rogers or TELUS or whoever, or from an app company, it's already anonymized by the time we receive it. So there's nothing, again, personally identifiable in what we do. There's no consent relationship required for us or for you as a festival operator or event operator, or any notice you have to give to patrons. Essentially, that consent piece has already happened when they agreed to download the Starbucks app or the weather app or signed up to have a phone with Bell or whoever. That's where the consent is happening. And in those consent relationships, us as everyday consumers who are agreeing to those things have enabled and allowed in the fine print of what we've signed there for them to sell and provide data to companies like us in an anonymized fashion. So when I talk about device IDs, which is at the core of everything that we do, this is on your screen here. This is what a device ID looks like. So it's just a string of letters and numbers, a hashed code essentially, but it's unique to each device. And on the left side, you see IDFA. This is what Apple calls a device ID. And on the other side, it's the Google Ad ID is what Google calls it for Android devices. So just two different terms, but essentially they're all device IDs. Any questions on privacy or anything like that?
I do. Can people opt out on it? Like, I guess
You
not.
can opt out through, all the various apps individually that you're, downloading and like as I'm sure you're aware, when you download an app today, typically one of the first questions it's asking you once you're trying to install that app is, are you willing to share your location? Are you willing to do this, that, whatever? And at that time, you can opt in or out. But the reality is that even if you're opting out of, all of these apps, you still have a phone on a cellular network. You can't really opt out of that. And so, that's why we're able to see 18 million phones every day at the end of the day. Other questions?
Is is it GPS data or cell phone data?
It's both.
Both. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So what do we do with this data? Like, how can it be useful? What kind of questions can it answer? So we do a lot of different things. As I said, we work across many different industries. And so what that means is, we're able to help you understand things like how many people came to my event and, where do these people live and how far did they travel? And so one of the things that was, really came out at the conference last week in Kitchener, the FEO conference that Victoria and I presented at, is many of the festivals and events, many of the municipalities that are hosting events, have some sort of government grant funding and support as a part of what they do. And one of the things that you have to report on to justify getting those grants is the percentage of people who travel greater than 40 kilometers. And so obviously, because we're tracking these devices 24/7, not only do we know how many came to your event, but we know where they live. And so we can tie that back to, we know what postal codes they're coming from. And then from there, we can calculate, the distance that they've traveled and how many of those are more than 40% sorry, 40 kilometers and so on. So there's a lot of power in this data, and in many cases, it's an easy way for you to get the answers to, the forms and the things that you have to fill out to justify, some of that. The other big use case that we see with festivals and events in particular is, in many cases, you have sponsorship as a component of what you do. And so, and Victoria will speak to this in the case study shortly, but essentially there's two ways that we look at sponsorship. Because we're tracking 24/7 these devices, it's not just when they show up at your festival or event, but where do they go before and where do they go after? And are they actually visiting the sponsors afterwards is something that we're able to answer with the data that we have. And so typically with most of the events that we work with, we're tracking the event itself, but then we track for a period of 30 days following, as that's our sort of default, as to, if you had specific sponsors like local car dealerships or Tim Hortons or a bank or whoever, are these people who went to your music festival or your event actually going to the local bank branch or the local car dealership or, eating at Tim Hortons? Um, and we can see that and we can measure to what extent that is happening, and have they ever been there before, like, is there an actual lift that's occurring that we can attribute to them being exposed to seeing advertising at your event, those kinds of things. And that's partly why we're so successful in sports as well, because when we work with the NFL or the NBA or the Toronto Blue Jays or who have you, you're sitting in the stands as a fan and you see all these ads around you. In the case of the Blue Jays, for Home Hardware or Mary Brown's Chicken or who not, whoever, and we're able to actually give them data to say, we saw 40,000 people at this game, and here's how many of them actually went to a Mary Brown's Chicken within the next 30 days, and which locations did they go to, and had they been there before, and those kinds of things. So that's really one of the key components of using a platform like this with mobile data, is we're able to help you understand not just what's going on the grounds of your event, but where else these people are going. And so that's a key piece to it. And and it's one thing to also say, like, we can do that with tracking follow on to sponsors you already have, but the other, on the flip side of this, is using the data to understand who you might want to go after in the future for sponsorships, right? So building a target list by understanding that your fans really like to eat at Pizza or what have you. Maybe you can take that data and go approach them and say, hey, you guys should be a sponsor for our festival next year, or those kinds of things. So there's a lot in what we can do there. Any quick questions on that stuff? No? Okay.
Nothing in the chat.
Uh, yeah, no worries. So just to give you kind of a sense of this, and you'll see more of this in the case study in a few minutes. But we have two types of clients we work with. We have clients that we work with year round, every single day, especially retailers like Walmart and such, where we build them a dashboard. Same for the Blue Jays and folks like that. And they can just log in on their own and they can see what's going on day to day, week to week with their property, how many people are coming into the store, how many of them are first time visitors, repeat visitors, how long they spend, in the stadium or at the event, etc. So, but the same data essentially is what we do for any festival, just on a project basis. And then we can plot this to understand where they're hanging out. We can heat map it. We can do different kinds of things with it. As I mentioned, there's a lot of diversity in the types of clients that we work with. So you'll see here, this is just a few, logos, but small things like in Mississauga here, their Polish Days Festival, which is a 1 day event, to working with the PNE out in Vancouver, or the Canadian International Air Show, which we're going to work with this year, or the Toronto Santa Claus Parade. We're doing, a local Rib Fest in Whitby, or a small music festival like Springtide, or Conversions in Oshawa, or things like that. So there's a lot of variety in what we do. The Central Lake Conservation Authority, we worked with them for their Maple Syrup Festival, as an example. So, a lot of variety there in terms of the types of things that are possible. And the other thing, just to point out, while I see the Santa Claus Parade logo there, is to keep in mind that when you're working with somebody like us that's in the mobile data space or doing what we call geofencing, it doesn't have to be a permanent space that we're looking at. It can be an outdoor, park. It can be any area where we can draw a boundary around the area and then measure what's going on inside of it. So when we do something like the Santa Claus Parade, essentially we're drawing a boundary around the parade route itself and measuring all the activity that we see in there, to understand what's going on. So just keep in mind, there's lots of flexibility in what you can do from that point of view. And then the last thing before I hand over to Victoria is everything I've talked about up until now is, an analytics type of offering from in terms of what we can do. So measurement, understanding who's there, did they go to sponsors, how long they spent, where they came from, did they travel more than 40 kilometers? The other side of our business is we can take all the data we have, all these device IDs, the 18 million plus phones in Canada every day, And we can build audiences from that, which we can provide you essentially a list of device IDs that we can supply to you, that can be used for ad targeting. So if you want to run an ad campaign to drive more ticket sales for a festival, or you want to just drive awareness about it, or get people out, or do a follow up with people after the event, we can build you lists of audiences for that. So I'll give you an example. So, out of the FEO conference last week in Kitchener, we were talking to the Oktoberfest, KW Oktoberfest folks. And, one of the things that they're really interested in doing, as Tracy from Oktoberfest shared with the crowd, is expanding their audience this year, like drawing, people from farther out than KW itself. Like, how do they get people to come from Hamilton or Toronto or Kingston or other areas that are, beyond their normal, catchment area? And so, one approach to that is we can look at people who are going to other beer festivals in Hamilton and Toronto and Kingston, and build an audience of people who went to those events. And then they can take that list of people who went to other beer festivals, for example, and then target them with ads to say, hey, why don't you come visit us at KW Oktoberfest this year? So there's things like that that are possible. And I say that because it's really important to think about, not just your own event or festival, but because of the kind of data we have, and because we're tracking 24/7 regardless, you don't have to own these other events, these competitor events or anything else. You can track any event that's going on and build an audience from that, whether it's yours or somebody else's. And again, no consent is required to do that because we're using all anonymized, privacy compliant data. I should also point out that if you look at my backdrop here with the world on it, and you'll see two logos up there and the logo on my shirt. So I'm also the founder and chairman of a nonprofit organization called the Location-Based Marketing Association, which has been around. I founded it in 2009. And it is the global industry association for the proper use, and best practices around the use of location data itself. So I'm the guy the CRTC calls into the hearings when they're looking at developing privacy regulations and things like that, and we work on that globally with various government bodies and so on. So I say that only to give you even further comfort around the fact that everything we're doing is 100% privacy, compliant and above board. Any last questions there, and then I'll hand over to Victoria.
Just a minute.
Sorry, Debbie.
So we had a question on privacy. Do you have a minimum data set that you need to reach before you can deliver the data? For example, you need to reach 1,000 mobile pings or acquired phone data at minimum. And Charlotte Moore asked that question.
Not really. I mean, I would say that when you're talking about mobile data for any event, there are I would say there are differences between, whether you're talking about a big urban market, or versus like a small rural community in terms of the how accurate the data is going to be. When we're talking about 18 million phones that we're tracking on a daily basis, like that's a good percentage of the population, and you have to with a lot of the events that we work with, and Victoria will share more about this in a second. There are, especially if it's a family oriented event, there's kids that don't have phones. There's folks that just don't have phones on them. We're not going to see those people with the data we have. But we do have ways to account for that. But there's really no minimum to it. Like, we've done events where there's 300 people in a room, and for specifically for brands that are hosting a small wine and cheese function or something like that, and they wanted to build data or capture that from a competitor's event. So yeah, no restrictions on that, but you will see differences in the number of phones that we see depending on the market. So I would say a good general average is we're going to see at least 70% of your actual audience purely off mobile data. All right, I'm going to hand over to Victoria.
All right, thank you. So yeah, from the festival and event production side, data is of course the number one thing that we need post-event to report to the government grants, as mentioned, as well as to our sponsors, as well as in our post-reporting. And so we, for years, have been doing surveys. We've done paper surveys. We've tried iPads, but they didn't work, so I cut those. We've done QR codes. We still do surveys regardless of the data that we get through ground level insights. But the surveys that we've done, are all to do with demographics and things like that. But of course, attendance for a free festival is very difficult to calculate. So we used to do aerial photos where we would literally put photographers on the tops of buildings and take photos and do kind of calculations. Of course, if we did have something like the tall ships, which are coming for June, they come every 3 years, but this year's festival, the tall ships return. And that's the only year that we have any sort of wristbands or ticket sales. So of course we would have numbers from that. All of our sponsors on site, we asked them to give us their data for how many people that they had or how many product they handed out. But really it's difficult as a free, family-friendly, open to the public, no gates festival to have any sort of idea of attendance. So this data, you can go to the next one, Asif. This data was really important and really something that I wanted to have for this year. We have done things in the past. There's a company called LiveGauge where you have to have a physical sensor on a table or at your info booth that takes a 50-foot radius of all the cell phones around that sensor, but it only takes the 50-foot. And it doesn't give us any insight into economic impact or sponsor people showing up at sponsors and things like that. So this is our data or the report that Asif sent to us after our festival. So number one is attendance. Of course, the number one thing that we get asked other than the economic impact for the grants is attendance. So we had 41,000 people. It shows you the dwell time. It shows you, which day people came more. I will say that this data or any data, if you work with a company that does something similar, your attendance numbers might go down from what you think they are. And that is something that we had to kind of justify to not only our board of directors, but just when we announce, right? Every year you want to have something more or you want to be able to go up or, we used to say that we had 100,000 people. Now, I will say we had multiple parks. Our festival has gotten smaller for the nature of festivals and events in Ontario specifically, and I think Canada. It's definitely a difficult time right now for festivals and events, especially free festivals and events. And so as a result, it is difficult to say that you're going up in attendance when it's shrinking. So we used to have, 3 parks, 200,000 people. We're now looking at, as you can see, like 41,000 people in one location, one park, 2 days. So that is something that was brought up last week when we presented this is if people are normally hearing that they had 100,000 people and now you get this data and it looks like you only have 70 or 80, that's still okay because this is concrete actual numbers that you can now use as a benchmark to go forward. So I just wanted to kind of preface that your numbers might go down from what you thought they were, but these are actually accurate. Next slide. So these are the types of things that we were able to see with that 30-day of tracking, as Asif was saying. So these are all the different, tourist attractions, retail stores. So the cell phones that were at our festival, this is where they showed up within a 30-day period. To see the ones that are most popular now kind of opens up my target list because I manage all of our sponsorships as well. I pitch the sponsors as well as, of course, reporting back to them. So to see Longos, 10% of our attendees went to that Longos at Maple Leaf Square. I can show that data to Longos and say, you should come to our event because we're already reaching some of your patrons, but you can reach more. Gas, convenience, coffee shops. And then the next one is the one that I was most excited about. So we had Ford Canada on site at our festival this year doing an experiential marketing activation. It was a 40 by 40 massive space. They were also doing test drives. They were test driving 3 of their new models. And so they really wanted to drive traffic to dealerships and I asked if we could track this data. So this is all of the dealerships that the cell phones from our festival showed up at. And I actually took this to Ford a few weeks ago, repitching them to say, you should return to our event because not only are people coming into your dealerships as a result of seeing you at our festival, but you can reach even more. So this is the kind of stuff that can be used to gain new sponsorships, can open up your target lists to new companies that you might not have thought of before, as well as help to justify sponsorships, or the current sponsors that you have help to justify their participation. And then, of course, from the government grant side, oh, sorry, next slide. The government grant the government grant side, the economic impact data is something that we have to report back every single year. And so to see that 26% of people traveled 40 kilometers away or more, usually they want 30%, but you can also have or 5,000 visitors. And so we have way more than 5,000 visitors. And then as well as seeing the estimated increase into the local area and the spending, this is all something that's really important to our BIA, which is a big supporter of our festival. So then we can go back to them and say, look at compared to a non-festival weekend, this is the increase in the lift that was seen in the area and to the businesses, as well as things like, distance traveled and then average dwell time, which is all, amazing. So any questions on kind of how you use it for a festival and event standpoint or anything from a festival and event? Any questions about reporting back to anyone? If not, I will pass it back for the next case study.
Debbie, is there anything?
No questions. No.
Okay.
I just will say, somebody asked and I put it in there, but it is being recorded. This session is being recorded and you'll have access to it.
Yeah, so just to pick up from this slide here, I do want to go a little bit deeper on the middle section with the 112% and 937K lift. So the way we calculate that, just so people have context for it, is because we're tracking 24/7 everywhere. Essentially, what we do is we take the festival area as defined by Victoria, for in this case for their waterfront festival, and we look at what does traffic look like on a normal weekend when there's not a festival happening in that area, in that space, in that parade route, what have you. And so we create this sort of baseline and we say, okay, on a normal day it's 6,000 people who are there. But when the Waterfront Festival is on, obviously we're at 41,000 people or what have you. And so this is how we calculate that sort of percentage increase in traffic to the local area by creating a baseline first. And then from there, we then take the delta between, how many people were there versus what the normal is. And we take that sort of delta number and we multiply it by a factor. In this case, our default that we use, which is customizable, but we use a factor of $225 per person as an average spend over this time period to get to that calculation of 937K lift in revenue. And so again, that can be totally customized to your local area, what your regional tourist expectations are. But that's sort of what we work with here in Toronto with TIO and other organizations as an average number by default. I hope that helps.
There is a question asking, can you show where people went before an event or just 30 days after?
No, we can show before. So a good example of that is so our BC Blues Fest in Ottawa, which we've worked with for the last number of years. One of the things that they ask us to track is they have a number of hotel partners in the area. And so they want to know a few days beforehand, are people coming into town? Are they staying at these hotels and then attending the festival and so on and so forth? So yes, absolutely. We can go as many days before or after as needed. So just going to highlight a couple different other use cases here, and we'll kind of come to a close and take questions. So I mentioned the Blue Jays. We've worked with the Jays for a number of years now, and I mentioned Mary Brown's in particular. So when we first started with the Jays, Mary Brown's, who I'm sure everybody on the East Coast knows who they are, obviously, but they were trying to grow their brand in Ontario, and they became a sponsor. I guess this is about 3 4 years ago now, of the Jays, and they took up some real estate inside the stadium with ads all over the place. They opened up an outlet, a Mary Brown's concession stand, in the Rogers Center, and but as we learned when we started working with sports teams, is they actually don't have any data on, does this sponsorship advertising actually drive any kind of ROI or traffic to these stores? And so that's where we were able to come in and sort of give them a very clear breakdown of where their fans were coming from, where they lived, what cities they were, coming in from. And one of the most interesting things that we saw is when we plotted it all on a map, in particular for weekend games, they were getting people more than they thought from, as far away as Sudbury or North Bay, or London, Ontario, or Ottawa, coming in, to Toronto for these games. And I say more than they thought because you might say, well, there's tickets and they have ticket purchase information, and that's true. But what we know, and I can use myself as an example, I'm a Blue Jays season ticket holder, and when you're a season ticket holder, you can't go to every game. You have other things going on. And so I end up, reselling tickets, giving tickets to friends and family, and so on. And so at the end of the day, you have my purchase information, and my postal code, and all of that. But all these other people I've resold to or given my tickets to, you have no information on them. Um, and so that's where, having mobile data to actually understand whose butts are in the seats and where they're coming from was a bit of a revelation for them in some cases. And so they were able to look at that data and say, well, we didn't know we were getting that many people from Sudbury and, North Bay. And to the point where they're like, well, let's lean into that. Let's buy more billboards, up on the streets up there and see if we can try to grow that audience even further. The Mary Brown's piece, we saw an 8% lift in foot traffic to local outlets, after, measuring, that first year of activation. And 3% of that were people who had never been to a Mary Brown's before. And how do we know that? We know that because we're tracking 24/7, which means that we see all these Mary Brown's outlets. We see how many mobile devices that are normally there. And then we can look back a year in time and we can say, okay, have these devices been to these outlets before? And in this case, 3% of them are brand new net customers who had never been to any Mary Brown's within the past year, in this case. And so we're able to actually give them, a lift measurement, or at least a correlation measurement, to say people who were exposed to advertising in the stadium, actually showed up at a Mary Brown store. We don't, again, like, we're strictly looking at mobile data. So we can't say they bought, a chicken sandwich or how much they spent. We don't know that. But we do know that they were in both places. So that's an interesting thing. Another good example is this here in Toronto. We have the Beaches Jazz Festival. And one of the things that we wanted to look at is, they wanted to validate their visitor traffic to what their projections were, and we were able to show an 80% projected volume there. But what's really interesting is the second bullet point. We decided to look and say, okay, are there people who come to the Beaches Jazz Festival who also go to the Montreal Jazz Festival, which is another big jazz festival? And we saw a 7% overlap in audience. And again, this is to illustrate the point that I said earlier, is you might be the owner operator of the Beaches Jazz Festival. You don't have to have any, control of the Montreal one. We can track anything, anywhere, whether it's your property or not. And so we were able to look and say, yes, for people we saw at the Montreal, 7% of them also showed up at the Beaches one. And this speaks to the, what I was saying earlier about audiences too, of building audiences for ad targeting, or the example I gave with Oktoberfest of tracking people who go to beer festivals and then, reaching them, with ads to try to drive, more ticket sales or more audience. And in their case, 19% traveled more than 100 kilometers, which is a big number for them to attend. And the last is Rifflandia, which is a music festival we work with out in Victoria. And they specifically worked with us beyond the tracking piece to build these audiences for ad targeting. So they had us look at a number of other music festivals in Vancouver, Victoria, Kelowna, um, build an audience from that, and the result was a 9% increase in ticket sales over the previous year to that. So that's kind of the power of mobile data and geofencing and what we can do with this. And I think we'll just open it up for any questions now in the last few minutes.
So there are a couple here on the chat. I think you answered that one. Okay, so are small businesses also included in the before and after, or just large restaurants, grocery stores, etc.?
All businesses, like we can track any business, small. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Especially when we're working with a lot of the municipalities, many of the sort of Main Street, sort of downtown, Main Street type of things that we do, where they might be having, Rib Fest or some sort of, one day music event or something like that. A lot of it is small businesses, the local flower shop, the local bookstore, the local, what have you. So absolutely, yes, we can do that.
Great. And Stephanie from South Shore Tourism had a question. She wanted to ask you directly.
Go for it.
Stephanie?
Thank you. So we run a month-long festival in February, the entire South Shore. So we're what, 400 kilometers long, I would say, and then we go inland for a decent distance. We have a number of anchor events, but every member potentially is having an event, whether it's hotels doing packages, restaurants doing specials, museums doing art exhibits and that type of stuff. How do you see tracking something like that? Is it
Yeah,
possible, I guess, is the first question, I see.
yeah, it's very possible. It's really at the end of the day, it just comes down to working with you to kind of define the scope of the area, number one, and then number two, like what are all these smaller sort of events properties within that are hosting these events. And I'll give you an example. So last year, we worked with the NFL on, I know this is completely scale-wise different, but we worked with the NFL on the draft, which was held in Detroit. And our client was the NFL, but it was also the city of Detroit and the Tourism Authority, because like the Olympics, these cities have to bid to host these things like a draft. And so our remit there wasn't just how many people went to the draft. It was, what is the economic impact on the entire city of hosting this? So they wanted us to tell them, what hotels did people stay at, and where did they eat, and where did they shop, and did they use public transit, and where did they park their cars, and like everything. So for something like that, like we ended up producing like an 80-page report, that was on, like this is what hosting that event did for the city. So, in order to do that, and answer your question, it's really about just setting the parameters and understanding, what the outcomes are that you're looking for from the
Right.
data in advance, so that we can answer the right questions.
And can you go back in time and pull historical data? Like we've been doing this event since 2018. In my head, I'm like, you mentioned like what is a weekend before the event happening? And I'm thinking, what was February like in 2017 before we hosted this event? And then what is the growth each year?
It is possible. Like, so from our own company perspective, we only hold 12 months worth of data at any time, so we can go back a year.
Right.
But we do through our partners have the ability to go more than that. But most of the time, we're not going more than a year into the past.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. So I have another question. Is there a standard percentage added to attendance numbers that factor in people who may not have mobile phones, i.e. children and seniors, thinking specifically for larger free events like parades?
Yeah, Victoria, do you want to take that?
Yeah, well, so that's what I don't know how I'll let him you speak to like the percentage, but basically I would say how many people or what the percentage of children to parents were. And I went back to Asif and said, okay, based on what we saw on site, based on our survey data, based on the demographics of the people, photos, things like that, there was about, 1.25 or two children's to every adult. And then he would do the calculation and come back to me, as well as things like ages and stuff. I do know other companies we worked with live gauge and things like that, they would have certain things like a dense body profile when people are like packed too tight
Yeah.
together, and cell phone or like the beams couldn't go through a bunch of people. We would give them photos, and then they would do the calculation. So you just kind of have to work with a CEF or your rep or whoever that you're talking to, just to give the percentage of what you thought visually from how many kids were there.
Yeah, I mean, there are standard numbers that we use for that. So, but in a lot of cases, we work directly with the client to understand, what is the scope of the event? What do you normally see? Like when we work with the Santa Claus parade, obviously, there's lots of kids there, right? So, we have to account for those kinds of numbers in that.
Asif, there's another. Rick asked, do you do this with trade consumer shows at all?
Good question. Yes, we have done. It's not something we do, regularly, but yes, it is possible to do that, and we have done that in a number of cases. We again, that like sometimes that comes to when you're talking about like a fair or some sort of trade show in a building with lots of booths and those kinds of things. Like we may want to get into what I was alluding to with the sensors on that text slide up at the top, in order to be super accurate with that, below the dotted line here. So I'll give an example. Not so much a trade show, but an indoor measurement like this. So last year when we worked with the Olympics in Paris, so the Canadian Olympic Committee, every year at every Olympics, they have what they call Canada House. And so this year in Paris, it was the Science Museum was taken over and became Canada House for the duration of the games. And so it's a three-story building. And inside of the building, you have sort of, an auditorium area where they had performances and things happening. But throughout the building, you had various sponsor exhibits for the Olympic sponsors. So you had the Lululemon area and the Bell area and the Canadian Tire area and all these different things. And we were asked to actually measure how many people went to each activation, to each sponsor piece inside the building. And so to do that, we were using Wi-Fi analytics and other things on top of the mobile data. So the mobile data was for them was where did these people come from, including, by the way, in their specific case, which countries were these people coming from? So how many were coming from the U.S. or from Europe or other places, and how many were Canadians? But inside the building, how many people went to the Lululemon booth, and engaged with them, and how long did they spend there, and those kinds of things. So there are lots of things you can do like that. And I should also point out, even when we're doing big fairs and festivals, so like when we work with the PNE, we create multiple geofences. So we'll have a geofence. Again, a geofence is just a large boundary for the area that we're tracking within. But we'll create one for the whole area of the PNE grounds, and then we'll create smaller ones inside of that for this is the concert stage, and this is the casino, and this is the agricultural barns area, and this is, all this, to know how many people went to each of those specific areas within the bigger, fence. So lots of things you can do there as well.
Great. Did that answer your question, Rick? Great. Good. So Nicole is asking, what's the cost of the service, and can a region be tracked versus an event?
Yes, a region can be tracked. I guess that, like, to me, that falls more into kind of an ongoing tracking exercise like we do with, our retail or sports clients, where we're just tracking, all the time for this particular area. So yes, is the answer to that question. How do we price it? It varies. I would say there's two variables that affect how we price things. So number one is the size of the area in terms of the number of locations that we're tracking. So, how many buildings, how many, areas, are we tracking? If it's all within one, area and there's multiple buildings, that's fine. But if we're tracking, other Maple Leaf Sports as an example, so in their case, we've got BMO Field, we've got Scotiabank Arena, we have multiple properties, but they're not all side by side. And so, we've got, let's say, 4 or 5 different properties, but we're tracking, all of them and we're doing it year round. So there's an ongoing type of engagement there, where they're paying us a monthly fee essentially on an annualized contract. When we work with, festivals and events, it's typically a project. It's a weekend, it's, a week-long event or something like that where, it's project based. It's still dependent on how many locations there are, and the other variable is the number of days, essentially. Those are the two things that impact cost. But I would say for a typical, weekend type of festival or event, you're looking at, and again, I'm just ballparking here, but you're looking at about an average of about $3,000. So it's not crazy.
That
Yes.
sounds amazing. Oh, Marie has a question.
I just have a couple of questions. So do you offer like a subscription so that, you could get a number of reports throughout a year or something like that?
Yep. So with a lot of the municipalities, I'll use the city of Pickering here in our area that we work with. So what we've done with them is they come to us and they say, okay, let's sign an agreement for the year, but we want you to track these 7 events, over the course of the year. So that includes their Canada Day, their holiday lighting of the tree, their this, their that. Like, so they lay it out and say, these are the 7 reports that we want for the year, and here's the fee we agree on for that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay. And my question is probably more for Victoria. And why would the numbers that you report for like a free event go down? You emphasize that from what
Well,
an event organizer believes it was. Is that because you're not measuring people under 18, but do you have a coefficient to account for that, or?
no, just kind of the old archaic ways that we would count attendance would be things through clickers or things like the aerial footage. You can't be 100% accurate because we don't know every single person we haven't accounted for. We're doing multiplications. We're doing as best as we can. But again, we're non-gated, non-ticketed, completely open parks. So we would estimate that we had 100,000 people, but we don't know definitively. Whereas with data like this, I have much more definitive data to say we know that we had 41,000 phones or something like that. So that's just kind of where your numbers might not be as large as you thought they were.
I'll
Mhm.
add one thing to that too. Like for a lot of the folks that we've worked with who've historically used click counters, you may have situations where people are going in and out throughout a day, right? So you might be counting the same person multiple times from a clicker point of view, whereas with us, that's only one device, and so we're only counting it once, regardless of how many times they're in and out,
Right. Okay.
right?
Thank you.
I mean, it's not a bad thing. It's more just having to kind of start your benchmarks over and compare now, since like we're now going to start to
Yeah.
compare our attendance to the years that we have had the data. But again, unique to our event and some other events, we change our size accordingly and our scope. So some years we have four parks. Some years we only have one, which is very hard to compare year over year. So yeah.
Mhm. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Well, we've got about 6 minutes. Is there anything, Asif or Victoria, that you'd like to add, or?
I don't think so. Not on my end.
No,
I actually just
yeah, go ahead,
Yeah.
Sorry.
Marie.
So when you present the data to, say, a festival, and you say this is how many people visited and how many people were from 40K and away and so on and so forth, is there built into that the recognition that a certain percentage of that audience could be under 18? And do you work that in mathematically when you give the total number? Or do you give the total number and then you say, but that doesn't include people over or under 18?
So we don't, I mean, technically we don't, because it's all anonymized data we're working with, we don't know how old they are or anything from that point of view. What we do know, however, is we know in order to calculate the 40-kilometer piece and all of that, we know what postal codes they came from. We can tie that to census data, so we can pull some demographics from the census piece to the household.
Mhm.
So that gives us a bit of a breakdown of percentage of people in this age category and that age category and so on. But that's an inexact science, right? In terms
Right.
of measurement from that point of view.
Okay.
And
Thank
I
you.
would also say, in addition to this data, continue to do your surveys because this isn't going to give you the detailed demographics that you need. And also things like, what was your favorite program? How did you hear about our event? All of those types of things that I need separate, that are much more specific, or even sort of, collecting emails and all that kind of stuff. I still do my paper surveys or my QR code surveys in addition to getting this attendance data.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful because you wouldn't know like why people came.
Yeah, or male, female, other age, those types of things that we really want to see, versus just the people, like the number of people versus who they were.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
It's really
Great to
good.
meet you all.
Really
Yeah.
interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Asif, and thank you, Victoria, for spending time with us. And just a quick reminder that there's a survey at the end of this. If you would take a few minutes and it'll pop up on your screen. There's only 5 questions. And Nora, thank you.
Thank you. This was a great session. So much to think about. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
And with that, I think we're done. So if you want to have Asif's or Victoria's information, please reach out to me and I will pass it on so that you can have an ongoing conversation with them. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Nora.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.